Today I am interviewing my son, Anthony Lance. He is our middle child. Just a little bit of background. From 1983 to 1987, my wife and I were missionaries in England. We lived in Newcastle under Lyme, and we were carrying on a ministry there to university students at the University of Kiel. Our oldest, Michaela, traveled over there with us, but Anthony was born while we were there. So Anthony was born in the North Staffordshire Hospital in Stoke-on-Trent, which is right next door to Newcastle under Lyme. So that's where our story begins. In '87, we moved back to the United States, and obviously Anthony came with us, and then we had another child. Our third child, Joanna, was born later. But that's where I'm going to turn the story over to Anthony. Basically, I've asked Anthony to tell us his spiritual journey, but also his business journey that has led him to live in Asia. So, Anthony?
All right, sounds good. Well, yep, being born in England is one of those funny facts that I get to tell people when they're like, "Oh, you're American, right? So, were you born in Oklahoma?" Like, not exactly. I was born in England. And so then they think, well, your parents must have immigrated to the U.S., to which I say, actually, both my parents are from Kansas. So, sorry, not quite that exciting, but it is kind of a fun thing that I get to tell people having been born in the UK, especially living internationally and having lived in Asia, met a lot of people from all over the world. It's kind of a fun little fact. So it's something I like to share with people. But yeah, my earliest memories are obviously being in Oklahoma, having come back in, I guess you said, '87. So I have some very fleeting memories of that, but not many. Most of my life having grown up in Oklahoma. I think for me, being, I mean, you hear the terms MK and PK kind of thrown around, missionary's kid, pastor's kid. For me, I feel like I grew up as a pastor's kid for sure. In that, coming back, you were, the pastor of the church there. And so I grew up in the church. But I think for me, it probably, I was still pretty young, and a lot of my friends, a lot of my community were associated to the church, and a lot of those friends I still have today. So I'm really grateful for that community that we had, that I grew up in. Some great, guys, some brothers, people that I'm still really close with today, which I'm really grateful for. And I realize a lot of people don't have that. So I think that was the big sort of fundamental thing for me, was just community, getting to know people, having that sort of foundation. But I think for me, I don't think my spiritual journey really, the first, I would say, big part of it was the renewal, or at least that's kind of the term that's been used for it. So I'll never forget that first meeting. It was at a vineyard, and I know the leaders of the church that you were associate pastor at. There was a lot of questions about the renewal. It felt strange. It felt weird. People were behaving in weird ways, some charismatic expression, so to speak. And so I remember we went to, I think it was like a Wednesday night or a Thursday night meeting. I don't remember exactly, but we went, and it was you and some of the other kind of leaders of the church and their kids who were my friends. We all kind of went together. And my first sort of experience, my first sort of thought was, I loved the worship because they had real drums and they had electric guitars, and it was cool. We went there, and it was rocking worship. And not to say that our church's music wasn't rocking, but it wasn't really rocking. So it was pretty fun. That was kind of my first sort of thought was, oh, this music's really fun. I enjoyed this. And then at the end, I don't know, have no idea what anyone shared, but eventually at the end they said, we're going to clear the chairs and pray for people. And all of us didn't really know what that meant. I just remember that suddenly there were no chairs, and me and my friends were all kind of standing around like, well, what happens next, And again, I was, I guess, 10 years old or so at the time, so didn't really know. And some lady just came up and gave me a hug and started praying for me. And that was kind of my first really tangible experience with the Holy Spirit, where I felt something physically in my body, ended up weeping. My friends, I still don't know exactly why, but none of my friends had that same experience. They kind of, stood to the side and kind of watched it happen, I guess. And I wept, and then I laughed, and I had a vision where I saw Jesus, and it was just a really powerful experience for me. And so I think And Dad, you could comment to this more, but I think that moment, obviously being very significant for me, in that that was my first really tangible experience with the Holy Spirit, I think also had some impact for the church as well, because I felt like the purpose of that meeting was to kind of feel out whether or not is this is this thing really of God, or is this just kind of a hokey, made up sort of thing. And it felt like maybe the experience that I had there might have impacted that or influenced that sort of thinking for you guys.
Let me provide some background to this whole chapter in Anthony's life. When we were in England in 1984, it was October of 1984, I became aware that a man named John Wimber was going to have a series of meetings at Westminster Hall in London. And myself and a guy that was involved in ministry with us, a guy named Steve Phillips, and another friend, Sean Kehoe, the three of us went down there and we stayed in Steve's parents' apartment. And we went to these series of meetings that John Wimber was holding. And I'd never really heard John Wimber speak. I didn't know exactly what it was about, but the title of the conference was Signs and Wonders and Church Growth. And when I saw that advertisement for that in a magazine, you know how sometimes you know in your spirit that you're supposed to do something? I knew in my spirit that I was supposed to go to those meetings. In those meetings, I heard John Wimber share his story about not only how he came to know the Lord, but how he came to be a pastor, and then also how his church came to be exposed to a movement of the Holy Spirit, and how the Holy Spirit was had reintroduced the gifts of the Spirit into the church, and they were experiencing supernatural things, healings and words of knowledge and prophetic words and various things. And so I saw the Holy Spirit fall on some people in those meetings. It wasn't real dramatic, but I had some sense of what a move of the Holy Spirit would look like. And I began praying that in my lifetime, God would let me be a part of a move of the Holy Spirit. That was in October of 84. And I was still praying that when we got back to the United States. It was exactly 10 years, this meeting that Anthony was touched at was October of 1994. So it was exactly 10 years later. And as a church, a small church at the time, which I was leading, we had been hearing stories out of Brownsville, Florida. We've been hearing stories out of Kansas City and Toronto that the Spirit of God was falling on people, and they were calling it the renewal. And this meeting that we went to that Anthony is talking about was an early days in that movement, and we went to see what God was doing. And out of all the people that were part of our fellowship, Anthony was the only one that was really touched that night. Um, a little of my perspective on what happened when Anthony said he started weeping, he just kind of fell down on his knees. And Cindy and I, my wife, were standing behind him, and uh, Cindy was kind of worried what was happening to Anthony because he was weeping. He was not a kid who had been through any real trauma in his life. So it was, weeping didn't make a lot of sense, except for the fact that the Holy Spirit was touching him. And then eventually he just kind of laid down on the floor. He laid there for a while. There was a lady lying nearby who had also was being touched by the Holy Spirit, and she began laughing. And pretty soon Anthony began laughing too, and he laughed for a while. And later we found out what had happened to him during that time. But anyway, that's some background on what the renewal was about.
Yeah, so I think that for me was definitely a moment and something that I'll never forget. And from there, that sort of movement, I know that our church, you and the other leaders of the church really, I think, decided to lean into it and to really embrace, that renewal, and to, welcome that into, into our church. And so I know that had a pretty massive impact on me. For those, that was very formative for me in my spiritual walk. So that was kind of the first maybe, big sort of moment for me in terms of encountering the Holy Spirit. Later on, certainly, I got older, um, went through some interesting, disciplinary problems in sort of middle school, and you guys had to pull me out of school, the small, homeschool co-op thing that we were a part of, and that was a difficult year. I had to be homeschooled. You guys decided to homeschool me my eighth grade year, which was due to some pretty bad disciplinary problems that I was going through at the time. And so 1 year at home with mom as my teacher pretty much set me straight. Um, I guess. Obviously,
She'll be glad to hear that.
yeah. Well, she's a great teacher, anyways. But just I think being away from my friends, which was probably what was kind of leading me to act out a little bit, was probably a good thing for me. So, anyway, so then and then my freshman year, I was then thrown into really a very different experience, which was going to public school. So I went from being a part of a small Christian school, that was associated with our church, for many years. My class had 6 people in it. It was very very small, and really a great experience. Really enjoyed that. But then to go into high school, I went to Booker T. Washington in Tulsa, which is at that time was 50% black, 50% other. They've since changed that, but that was a very unique new experience for me. Now, Michaela, my older sister, was already going there, so that's kind of the open door that I had to be able to go there. Really an amazing school and a great, an awesome 4 years for me. Some people talk about their high school experiences and all these terrible things, but really for me, it was high school was overwhelmingly positive. I had I made the soccer team my freshman year, so I made varsity and got to play, and actually I think I scored 3 goals my freshman year. So it was, right away I kind of, even though there was a little bit of hazing and things like that, I still was accepted pretty quickly, and that really helped, I think, for the 4 years that I was there to kind of get plugged in and just be generally accepted, I guess. So that was high school, and then eventually I got. It was during high school, my sophomore year, is when my dad is when you started going over to China, and so I think it was '97 if I remember correctly. You had a project with flight safety where you were over in China in Kunming, and I didn't really know anything about China, but you started making these trips, and I think it was every couple of months, sometimes for as long as 4 or 5 weeks, that you were on this project. And you came back and just shared, photos and kind of just some stories and things. And at the time, I knew I had to study a foreign language, and I needed to do at least 3 years of it. But I had learned a little bit of Spanish, but honestly, just didn't excite me at all. And so it was during that time that I discovered that we had a Chinese program at Booker T. And I found out later that our high school was the only one in the whole state that had a Chinese program at that time. And so that was a really interesting coincidence, I suppose. So I decided to sign up for Chinese class. And that was primarily just because of the stories that you had shared and some of the photos and things. And it just, I don't know, for me, it just felt like everyone was telling me, oh, you should learn Japanese. If you want to learn an Asian language, you got to learn Japanese. That's where all the job opportunities are. That's where everything is. But I don't know. There was just something about Chinese that really excited me. Felt interesting, and hearing some of your stories, it just kind of felt like, this is a really different experience. And so, yeah, so I decided to start studying Chinese, and so I had a really really fun Chinese teacher. She was an American lady who just had a real energy and an excitement about China. We didn't learn just the language, but she also taught us about the history and the culture, and she just made it fun, And I'm not sure that when I left after 3 years, I'm not sure that my Chinese proficiency was super high, but I really enjoyed it, and I had a genuine interest, to explore China and just that whole, to go visit and try to, learn the language and that sort of thing. So when it came time to graduate, I still wanted to continue my soccer. And so I was looking for a school that where I could play soccer, potentially with a scholarship, but also where I could study international business, because I knew I wanted to do international business, and Chinese. And that was really, really hard to find. And it turns out that I think we only found 4 schools, well, 3 that really ticked all those boxes. So we went and visited a few different schools, but in the end, it was Valparaiso University. It's kind of a long story, but obviously a pretty cool story about how I ended up getting a scholarship to go to Valparaiso University, which is in Northwest Indiana, kind of an hour sort of southeast of Chicago. Got a scholarship to go study Chinese, which is, I was actually the first person at the school to receive that scholarship. In fact, the scholarship only became available the summer before, the summer that I graduated from high school. And it was only because you had left your business card with one of the professors there. And then he called us that summer and said, hey, by the way, this new scholarship, this Freeman grant, has just been approved. 4 students per year can get $20,000 scholarship to study Chinese. And he just happened to still have your business card and called and left a message for us. And so we called him back, and I got the email of the Chinese professor. He said, just send him send him an email and ask him how you can apply for this. So I sent Professor Lin an email and just said, hey, I'm Anthony. I've studied 3 years of Chinese, Mandarin. I'd like to apply for this scholarship. And I said, what do I need to do? And he emailed back and said, you've got it. So it turns out I was the only person that even knew about it or even applied for it. So I think there was one other girl that ended up getting it as well that year, but out of the 4, there was only 2 of us that ended up getting it because it had just come online and no one knew about it. So that was just, I felt like that was really God's provision and His leading. The way that all kind of worked out was just kind of a miracle. So I ended up at Val. Now the stipulation was that I had to double major because I wanted to major in international business, but in order to have the scholarship, I needed to study Mandarin as well. So I ended up having to do a double major. So it was pretty much at that time that I knew I was going to have to give up soccer, even though there was willingness from the coach there to let me try out and potentially walk on to the team. It was pretty clear that soccer was not going to be my future anymore, as much as I loved it. So it was time to focus on business and Chinese. So now when I tell people this story, they're like, wow, that was just brilliant that you studied business and Chinese, like amazing, foresight to have thought of that, because at that time, that just wasn't the thing to do. That wasn't really, China had not really, begun to economically blow up yet. And so, but I would just laugh and say, I don't know why I did that. There was no, there wasn't any sort of clear thought of like, this is a great idea. It just kind of felt natural. Just that's where my interest lied. And so that's kind of why I pursued it. So over the course of my 4 years at university is right when China just started to blow up. And it was kind of that from 2002 to kind of 2006, that for 4 years that I was an undergrad. And it was just like every issue of The Economist, China was on the front every single month, talking about this, talking about that infrastructure, all these sorts of things, opening up, new policies, new businesses, new opportunities. And it just became a really exciting thing. So by the time I graduated, everyone was just like applauding the fact that I had done international business in Chinese. Everyone just thought that is just genius. But, it really wasn't a deeply thought out sort of thing. Like no one predicted what was going to happen, with China, certainly not to that sort of the speed at which China developed. So anyways, all of that happened. So during that time, I definitely, my spiritual experience in college was interesting, in that I think very much the way I had grown up, I had sort of a core group of guys that were really close friends of mine. I wanted that in college as well. And so my freshman year, I decided to join a fraternity, which was certainly, I think, a bit of a shock to my parents, having probably known at least a little bit about what a fraternity can be like. So I joined a fraternity, and I think very much with the hopes of having that same camaraderie. I think now as I look back, I realize it was very much a desire to have that same sort of brotherhood, same sort of camaraderie, friendship that I'd had growing up. And so I found some of that. I certainly, some of those relationships have lasted. But it was really my junior year where my spiritual journey kind of, I would say I had another sort of awakening. But one of the things that happened, I think at that time that was really interesting not just my own journey, but also I started to go to China. So between my sophomore and junior year was my first trip over to China, and so I had gone. I went for a summer trip with our university, which was about 1 month sort of thing, and then I had about a month and a half, about 6 weeks or so of free time before the next semester kicked off. And I was in Hangzhou, China, which is on the east coast, about 2 hours south of Shanghai. And so I had about 6 weeks free. Well, you had met some Chinese missionaries, and I had met some Chinese missionaries as well through a couple of friends. And so we had a few contacts who were out in Kunming, which is where you had done your business trips back in 97, 98. And so I had the idea, well, why don't I just go out to Kunming and I can catch up with, some of these people that I know who happen to be missionaries out there. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I just thought I'll just show up and we'll kind of see. I didn't have a place to stay. I just kind of thought I'll just kind of show up and see what happens. So I bought a train ticket to go from Hangzhou to Kunming. What I didn't realize is that takes 3 days. So that was my first shock, was that I was on a train for 3 days. It's one of these ones where it's a sleeper train, so you've got sort of 6 bunks in a room, very hard, uncomfortable mattress. You've got one blanket, one pillow, and you're kind of trapped inside this little train for 3 days. And there's not a lot of turnover. I mean, a few people come and go, but you're kind of stuck with the same people eating, instant noodles and whatever else, tea, eggs, and just whatever else they would bring around. You just kind of buy and eat it. So that was interesting. But what happened is, on that train ride, there was a guy sitting across from me, and his name was Mo Qinghua, and my Mandarin at that point wasn't great. I'd studied obviously for a few years, but it wasn't really conversational yet. So I met this guy, and his English wasn't great, but I found out, through, I mean, again, we were stuck together for 3 days, so we had a lot of time to kind of try to interpret what the other person was saying. So we kind of wrote things down, and he could read better than he could hear, so I'd write things down, and then anyways, back and forth. So I kind of got to know this guy a little bit, and he was just really friendly. And he had just graduated as a social worker. So he just graduated from a university in Hangzhou, and was headed out to a job. He just taken a job, and it was not in Kunming, but in Yunnan. So he was taking the train to Kunming, and then he was going to go up into some village somewhere for his assignment, basically as a social work guy. So got to know him a little bit. Well, I didn't really have a lot of stuff with me, but I did have a New Testament Bible that was in both English and Chinese, simplified Chinese, which I was actually using to study because I was trying to learn, new words, and so I was kind of using it for that purpose. Well, I pulled it out, and so we kind of started reading it together, and he was kind of asking me questions about it, and I really, other than him just reading it, I didn't really have any way to communicate much. I hadn't really learned really any of the necessary vocabulary to be able to kind of share, a lot in-depth stuff. But as we were just kind of talking, one of the things that I did say to him somehow, through kind of the broken language, that we had on both sides, was that when I'm in trouble, I pray. And when I pray, I can, by praying, we just simply ask God for help, and we can do it anywhere. You don't have to go to a temple. You don't have to go to a church. It's just kind of wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, you can pray for help. And I guess that was something that he heard and remembered. Well, we parted ways, said goodbye. I think he left me his phone number, so I might have written down his phone number, but, as far as I knew, that was kind of the end. Well, I just had the sense to give him the Bible, so I just gave it to him. I said, why don't you just take this? I've got more, or I can get more. So he was super, super thankful, really nice guy. And that was it. So I said goodbye and kind of, went on my way. And it was about a month later that I got contacted by a lady, and she said, "Yeah, I'm calling. I have your phone number. I got your phone number from this guy, and I wanted to call you." Well, her English is really good. She's Singaporean, and so long story short is, it turns out that she was on a similar assignment to this same village that this guy was, and so she ended up meeting him. Well, when she got there, and she got to the village, she met this guy, and they were working together. She discovered that every single day, all of the free time that he had, he was reading this Bible. And turns out she's a Christian. She's from Singapore, but she was just on assignment here. And so she was super curious. And so she asked him, she said, first of all, how did you get this Bible? And secondly, why are you reading it every day? And so he tells her this story. And the story is that when we parted ways off of the train, he then had a very long journey to get to this village. Now, this village, it turns out, is in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no electricity at night. I mean, really a very, sort of remote destination. He'd never been there before. So he, leaves the city and gets kind of a ride to somewhere he needed to go. And then it was kind of on foot from there. And so he ended up on foot and ended up getting lost. And so he was supposed to make it before nightfall, but he ended up going the wrong way or got misdirected or something like that. And he ends up basically lost. And it's sunset, the sun goes down, and there's no lights anywhere. And it's just pitch black. And so he's kind of thinking, and it's cold, it's cold up in the mountains there, even in the summer. And so he was really nervous about that. Well, I don't know why, but somehow at that moment he remembered, I guess, what I had said, that in any moment, wherever you are, whatever the situation is, you can pray for help. And I guess he just remembered that and decided he was going to do that. And so I don't know why exactly. And so sure enough, he prayed, I guess. And after he prayed for help, he looked up and saw a light in the sky, is how he described it. And it just kind of came out of nowhere, this big light. Not like a star, but like a light is how he described it. Almost like a street light, but up high, like kind of in the lower horizon. And that was the only thing he could see. So he decided to just start walking towards it. And he walks towards this thing for quite a while. And it just basically leads him straight to his village. And so he gets to this village having followed this light. And the light was not in the village. It wasn't like it just kind of disappeared when he got to the village. And so he took that as a miracle. It certainly sounds like a miracle. And it had a pretty massive impact on him. And so he felt like from that moment that he felt like this must be real. There's something going on here with, I prayed and then a miracle happened. And so he just started reading his Bible. And anyways, I didn't have a ton of contact with him after that. But this lady, shared, now he's up in the mountains where there was no cell phone reception. So there wasn't even a way for him to say text message me or anything like that. But she relayed, this whole story to me, which was incredible. I mean, for me, it was just, wow. It was an absolutely very tangible miracle, that I didn't pray for. I didn't, just to have been a part of that. And I know now that God had a plan for his life and that I was just a part of it. But to have played that sort of role, to have been part of that sort of thing and to see that kind of miracle absolutely change someone's life. I did end up meeting him a couple of years later. And he'd become a Christian. He'd met a girl, through their ministry thing, and they were married. And he invited me to their wedding. So even though I'd only met him that one time on the train and one other time very briefly, he invited me to their wedding a couple of years later. And so a couple of years later, I actually flew out to Kunming and went to his wedding, and it was pretty incredible because he had me stand up in front of everyone, honored me, and told the whole story to everybody, his family, everybody that was at the wedding. It was pretty incredible thing. For me, it just felt like I didn't really feel like I did a whole lot. I mean, we were just on a train and we just kind of shared. It's not like I had anyone else to talk to. It didn't feel like it was anything really significant there, but it had a massive impact on his life. And because of he's in social work, his impact then on other people, I think, has been pretty big. And I don't know, because I haven't had any contact with him for many, many years. I don't know the end of the story, so to speak. But that, I think, for me was the first time where I just felt like, man, one maybe small little thing that I did had a very big impact on someone else's life. And that was definitely a significant moment, for me in my faith, and also in my desire to, impact other people in a positive way.
Maybe I could give just a little bit of background on how it is that Anthony became connected to Kunming. Anthony mentioned in '96 and '97, I was making trips to Kunming with Flight Safety because we had sent a simulator there. It was a Boeing 757-767 combo, and we did most of the work to finish this simulator from a software point of view in Kunming. And so I was traveling there a month at a time. This was the same year that Anthony was being homeschooled by my wife at home.
Due to disciplinary problems at school.
And so my wife would call me and say, "Hey, I, I can't get Anthony to do this, that, or the other." So we would have a little chat about it on the phone. And anyway, we made it through that year okay. But I spent 5 months in China with a month between each trip. But on my first or second trip, I heard that one of the technicians who was working, one of the Chinese technicians that was working at the learning center, was a Christian. I can't remember who told me that. I think it was the receptionist, who apparently was a Christian as well. And so I determined that I needed to meet this guy, and we managed to do that. And so I invited him to go have a meal with me. We met for lunch or supper, I don't remember. And so I was just asking him questions, and turns out that he knew an American missionary couple. And I asked him, well, could I make contact with this couple? And he said yes. And so he put me in contact with Tom and Robin Elder. They were Americans from Virginia, and they were conducting a ministry there in Kunming. And I got to know them. I spent quite a bit of time with them. And so every trip I would connect with Robin and Tom, and we spent time together. We had gone through the renewal, and so I was able to introduce them to some of what God was doing through the renewal and just the Holy Spirit touching people. And we had some meetings with them and some Chinese people where we got to lay hands on some people and see God touch them in new ways. I also got to share the bridge illustration, which I had learned from the navigators, with a group of Chinese, and introduce them to that way of understanding the gospel. So that was part of our connection that Anthony was going to Kunming to pick up on, was this relationship with Tom and Robin Elder.
Yeah. So all those things kind of work together for all of that. And so I decided at the end of school, so I spent an entire semester in Hangzhou at the at Zhejiang University. Now, Zhejiang University didn't mean anything to me at the time, but I found out later is like the number 3 ranked university in China. So when I tell people now that I studied Chinese at Zhejiang University, they kind of go, that's why your Chinese is good, is because of that. But really, I only got to spend one full semester there as an international student studying Chinese. Had quite an interesting experience. My class, I was in year 3, which is fairly advanced because I'd been studying for a number of years. So in my class, there were no other Americans. My class was made up primarily of Koreans. So I had Koreans, including a couple of North Koreans, which was interesting. And then I had one German guy, a couple of Malaysians. It's kind of a mixture, but I was the only white person, I'll put it that way. It was mostly, people from other Asian countries that were in that sort of advanced, Chinese level. If I'm really honest, I don't think I was a great student. I didn't score great on tests and things like that, but I really liked talking to people. And generally, I like people in general. And so I generally like to talk to people, so anytime when us students were going to go somewhere, we get in a taxi, I'd always end up sitting in the front, and I'd just strike up a conversation with the taxi driver, and my Mandarin wasn't great, but it was enough to, go, which part of China are you from? Or how long have you been in, Hangzhou? Or just simple questions like that. I could have some conversations. And the dialects and things in China are very challenging. So even if you understand Mandarin pretty well, most people are, for the vast majority of Chinese, Mandarin's their second language. It's not their first language. So you get pretty heavy accents and things. So it is challenging to kind of understand people. But I just, I guess it's my personality maybe, but I just love talking to people. I just loved, interacting. So my speaking picked up very, very quickly. So I picked up the speaking. I think also my background in music. They say that I had a really good professor at Valparaiso University, and he was actually a musical background. And so because Mandarin is a tonal language, you have to speak it in a certain way with different tones. You have to. I think the key skill that you need is you have to be able to hear yourself. And that's something that you learn when you sing, because when what you hear is different than what everyone else hears because it's a vibration inside of your head. And it's the same thing with language. So learning the tones, if you have a musical background, you actually have an advantage there because you can hear the sound, that's coming out. For example, if you said 出去, 我要出去, it means to go out. Like, oh, I'm just going out to go do something. 出 and 去. Most Americans can't differentiate those two sounds. They sound like, and in class, my professor was like, okay, 出去, and everyone goes, choo choo. He's like, no. 出去, no. Choo choo. Like, no. But I just couldn't hear it. And so for me, the advantage I had was having done music and having recorded music and things, I understood, I could hear the sound that I was making. And I think that really helped me to be able to make the sounds. And so that gave me a bit of, so anyways, all that to say, my speaking came along very quickly. So I picked up speaking, I became very conversational very quickly. In terms of my reading and writing, I think I'm still probably not great, as great as I should be, considering how many years I've studied it. Enough to get by, but that's kind of how I really kind of got into it and really enjoyed. I just enjoyed being there. And so when I look back now at all of the classmates that were out there with me, I'm not aware of any of them who still interact with China to any degree. We had quite a few people in our class, and even in my grad school program. Of all the people that were there was probably 20 or so people that were a part of that program out of Valparaiso University. I'm not aware, at least not in my class, I'm not aware of any of them who still do anything related to China, who go there, travel there, do business there, or anything like that. I think I'm the only one who's actually still, heavily involved in, living in Asia, but also, doing business and traveling and things, in relation to China. And of course, my wife is Taiwanese, so we speak Mandarin, at home, and we do quite a bit of traveling around the region. So, yeah, so it kind of, those things sort of fell into place for me. And I knew that when I graduated that I wanted to do business and I wanted to do something related to China because that was what I was doing. The problem was when I started to go online and look for job opportunities, nobody was looking for anyone like that. Nobody was thinking, oh, I'm going to find an American guy who speaks Mandarin, because that didn't exist at the time. And so all of the jobs that were available were looking for Chinese people who spoke English. And so that initial, job search was actually a little bit challenging.
I just gave Anthony a signal. I wanted to interject something because during that same period of time where you met that guy on the train, I think it was the same summer you had the experience with the Chinese rock band. Is that true?
Yes.
Just tell that story.
Okay. So yeah, that same summer that I went out to Kunming, I had a very interesting experience. Even today, when I think back to it, I kind of go, "What was that? That was interesting." And I met. I'm trying to remember exactly how it happened, but as I was there, I ended up meeting a couple of guys who were doing music, and one of them, it turns out, was we had the same birthday, exactly the same birthday. So that was interesting. Like same year, same day, everything. So that was really interesting. He was a musical guy, and I met these guys just through. It was through a music store because I popped into a music store, I think, to buy a guitar maybe, and ended up meeting these guys in this music store. Found out they had a band, and so they were curious about me and my music because I had written some music and things. Of course, my music was mostly worship Christian music, but they were really curious about that. So they invited me to come over and play some of my music at a. It was actually, it was basically a pub. So they invited me to come and play this one night. They were like, "Oh yeah, we're performing at a pub, and you can go up and do a couple songs." And I was like, "Sure, why not?" So I basically showed up, and they turns out, I didn't know this, but turns out they're like a death metal band. These guys. So I showed up, and everyone's like long hair. These guys are like rock and rollers. And so I didn't really feel like I fit in necessarily, but they were just really cool guys, and they got up there and I didn't understand a word that, it's death metal. It was this it was wild. So here I'm in Kunming, and these guys most of them were minority groups. They were from minority group. Most of them weren't Han, the main, ethnic group in China. And so that was just a really interesting kind of group of people. But man, they just rocked. They went up there and they just rocked their faces off. And it was pretty impressive and it was very fun. And then they're like, okay, and now our friend from America is going to come up here and play a couple songs. And here I showed up with my acoustic guitar, a pick and a capo, and played a couple of my pretty mild, acoustic renditions of a couple songs. But everyone loved it. They were super supportive, and it was fun. I had a great time. And it was a few weeks later that they contacted me and said, "Hey, how would you like to perform with us at a concert?" And my Mandarin wasn't great at the time, so I didn't really know what they were asking. But I just said yes. I'm like, yeah, sure. Why? I'm here this summer. I guess I can make that work. And they said, yeah, we're gonna play this concert, and we thought you could come and play with us. I'm like, all right, I'm in. Sounds good. Where is it? They said, well, we're gonna have to drive there. I was like, drive? Okay, so what do I need to prepare? They're like, well, bring a change of clothes and whatever else. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I didn't really know where it was, but so I packed a backpack of, with a change of clothes, and I guess I brought my guitar, and these guys picked me up in a van, hopped in the van, and we just started driving. There were two vans, so they brought all their equipment, guitars, and all this stuff in these two vans, and we just started driving. And it turns out that it was actually two different gigs. So we stopped at one, which was again sort of a pub, type of situation, not very big. So I'm kind of thinking this is probably what we're doing. Well, we finished that one, and then the next day they said, okay, now we're going to drive to another location. And so I kind of was asking, well, how long is that going to take? They're like, oh, it's going to take all day. And I'm like, oh, so this place is kind of far. And it turns out the place we were going to was right on the border with, basically right on the border of Tibet. So it was all the way at the top part of Yunnan province. And I didn't know anything about that area. It's now referred to as Shangri-La. At that time, it was not. But we drove, and in the midst of that, we had a van breakdown. I don't know, we had a number of things happen that were very interesting. But eventually we finally made it to this place, which is, the middle of the scenery was stunning. We were driving through the Himalayas, basically. So the scenery was absolutely stunning. So we all along the way, I'm kind of talking as well, just kind of getting to know these guys a little bit. And we're pulling off to the side of the road to pee. This is like, it was pretty rustic. And we just had a great time just laughing. They were teaching me, different Mandarin words. And so it was a great experience. But anyways, we show up to this little village, I guess, town. And they're like, okay, this is where the concert's going to be. And we start unloading the van, and I get out there, and it's a massive stage with lights and disco balls and, giant sound system. I'm just thinking, especially after having driven what we, for an entire day through the mountains, I'm thinking we're in like a village. This is going to be real basic. This is like a massive rock concert. And so I'm kind of in shock. I didn't really expect that. And so they set everything up, and man, people just started rolling in from I don't know where. And it was kind of a big plaza. It was a big stage and just this big open area. And it just started filling up with people. And it was like thousands of people. And by the time this thing started, I don't know, it was countless numbers of people. It was just a huge throng of people. And I had because of our communication, limitations, I just had no expectation that that's what it was going to be like. So anyways, there was a couple of opening bands, and then these guys went up and just rocked. They just were jumping around the stage, throwing mics. It was like they just, and there was all these young people kind of in the front, and they were it was like a mosh pit kind of. It was just people were like really into it. And again, I was just kind of in shock about the whole thing. And then same thing, they finish up and they're like, okay, and now our friend from America is going to come up and do a song. So here I come with my acoustic guitar and my capo and my pick, and I sang a couple of songs, and they were both worship songs, because that's what I'd written. And so here I am, in this village, close to the border of Tibet, performing for thousands of people on a stage. And I guess they couldn't have understood what I was singing, but they were clapping, and I had kind of a moment. It started drizzling, like just a little bit of rain started kind of drizzling down while we were there and while I was up there singing. And it just kind of was this moment where I don't know how to describe it, but I just kind of like, what in the world is going on? Just kind of one of those you kind of out of body moments where you kind of look at yourself like, what sort of things have happened to get you in this situation? So it was just really, really amazing. Pretty cool experience. Certainly a strange one. But the cool part of that story is that at the end of that trip, we came back, eventually made it back again after a van breakdown. We ended up, the van broke down. We ended up in a really small town, and we got to this restaurant, and we were starving because we hadn't eaten anything all day. And so we show up to this, and there was like one little hostel type of thing in this little town that had food, and we got there late, and so we're like, they were just like, do you have meat? Fine. They're like, yo, meal meat. Fine. They're like, do you have any rice? So they're just, we literally would just eat some rice, and that's all they had. They had no meat, vegetables, nothing. So they just basically made us a whole bunch of rice, and all sort of 10 of us just scarfed down a bunch of rice, and that's all we had that night for dinner. That's all there was. And you should have seen these guys eating this rice, man. I was like, ooh, they could eat it. It was amazing. So that was an interesting experience. Eventually, we made it back. Anyways, about a week or so goes by, and I get a call from their lead singer, who's the guy who had kind of been my main interaction point with the band. And he had invited me to something. He was performing or something, so I'd showed up. And anyways, we ended up just kind of sitting down together, and he just said to me, like, I think I want to be a Christian, just kind of like that. And I obviously shared with him as much as I could. Again, my language was pretty limited, but I'd shared with him that I was a Christian, and I'd learned a few vocabulary words, and so in the end, yeah, I as best as I could, I sort of led him in prayer, but again, my language was so limited, I didn't really know what to, but it definitely felt significant. And it felt like he was, pretty touched. And I have no way to contact him. I have no phone number. I have no email. I have no way to ever follow up with him. So I have no idea what ever happened with the rest of his life. That was the last contact I had with him. But what a wild experience, just to, sort of gone through all of that. And then to have that kind of thing happen. Again, he had the exact same birthday as me, same year, same day, everything. And it just, to me, it felt like that was really, God had just kind of set that whole thing up as an opportunity for this guy to, to meet me and be touched in that way. So that was the other part of that summer. It was a bit of a wild summer in hindsight.
Do you know his name?
I don't remember his name. Oh, I do. Yeah, it was John Gordon. John Gordon. Yeah.
So if you were talking to him, what would you say? John?
John. Mr. John, that'd be his surname,
Mr.
but
John?
Gordon would be his given name.
I'm just going to pray for Mr. John right now.
Okay.
So, Lord, thank you that you brought Anthony into contact with the guy who was born on exactly the same day on the opposite side of the world. Thank you for bringing them into contact with each other. I don't know what's happened in this fellow's life spiritually in the intervening years, but I just ask that you would continue to touch him, speak to him, and bring him into contact with other believers that can be significant in his life. I pray that Mr. Chong and his entire clan would come to know you. Everybody that is part of his clan now, and all of his children, his wife, I pray that his whole family tree would be come to know Jesus. Amen.
Amen. So that was a pretty amazing summer. I definitely felt at that point, this is definitely where I want to be. And so, as I was saying, when I graduated, or as I was preparing to graduate, you were certainly on my case to start looking for jobs. And so I started reaching out, and I was just looking for anything, associated to China, any sort of, export this or that or import, or, just looking, and there just wasn't a lot out there. And the jobs that did exist, it was people looking for Chinese who spoke English, because that was the only, in terms of engaging with China, that was the only option. It was Chinese people who had learned English. There were no Americans who had learned Mandarin. That didn't exist at that time. And so it was pretty hard to find a job, or at least to find anything that felt like a good fit. And it was really just kind of another sort of miracle that I got connected to a guy. In fact, it was a guy from a rival fraternity, go figure, who reached out to me. This is when I was in grad school. So it was my 5th year at Valparaiso University. I was in grad school studying Master of Arts in Chinese Studies. and he was a senior, so he's a year below me. He reached out to me, and from this other fraternity who hated us. Now, I wasn't particularly super involved in the fraternity life after my sophomore. After I started going to China and things, it wasn't heavily involved. So, but anyways, it was just funny that he had reached out to me, and so he said, "Hey, I've got this job that I'm doing. I did an internship last summer, and they're looking to hire someone who speaks Chinese and who can do business in China. And they told me to look for a Chinese person, but I heard that you speak Mandarin, and so I thought I would reach out to you." I found out later that our that his boss had actually given him, I think, $1,000 incentive or something like that. It was like, "Hey, if you can find someone, I'll give you $1,000." So he actually had a financial incentive to kind of try to reach out and find somebody. Anyway, so long story short is we met up in the library, and he just pulled out his laptop and started showing me photos of China and going to these little car shows and doing trainings and these sorts of things for this product. And the product was called Meguiar's, which is a car wax and polish company out of California. And so that was really interesting. I mean, I've always loved cars. We grew up working on cars together. So we did a lot of the mechanical side. I wouldn't say I never waxed a car in my life, that's for sure. But I loved cars. I've always had a strong interest in cars my whole life. And so he started showing me all this stuff, and about car shows and going to China and different parts of Asia. And it just was like, wow, I didn't know what to think about it. He said, "Would you be interested in doing a summer internship this upcoming summer?" I said, "Well, yeah, possibly." So he said, "Well, let me get you in contact with my boss, and then you can have an interview." So I had an interview with his boss, a guy named Tom, and it went great. I mean, it was like one of those interviews. A few interviews in your life where you're just like, "Man, I nailed that one." That was all the questions I had great answers for. He's like, "What was the last book you read?" And the last book I'd read was A Billion Customers, which was a book about China. So it was kind of I nailed it basically. I was the right guy for the job, so to speak. And so he decided to give me the shot. So he said, "Why don't you come over and do a summer internship? We're based in Hong Kong, but we're trying to expand into China." And so I was like, "All right, let's do it." So that was really my only opportunity, that had come up that was anything related to China or anything that I wanted to do. So yeah, went out, did the internship, basically spent the entire summer just traveling all over China. Now the funny thing is that at car care, when it comes to detailing cars, somehow I never learned how to say rotary polisher in any of my Chinese classes. So I don't know if I slept through that class or it's just there's so many specialized industry terms that I didn't know. And so my very first training that I ever did, I had to learn 100 new vocabulary words before the training. So I had 1 week to learn 100 new vocabulary words, things like parts of the car, like trim, engine bay, different materials like rubber, vinyl, plastic, tires, wheels, interior of the car, glass, there were all these words, tools, equipment, polishing pads. I didn't know how to say any of these things in Mandarin. So I had to crunch pretty hard. And I'm sure if I went back and watched my first training now, it would be very difficult to watch because I'm sure it was terrible. But everyone was very supportive, and the fact that an American from an American company had come out to spend time with them, I think was already kind of special. So they were very forgiving. And the great thing about China and about Chinese people is that they're so excited that you speak Mandarin because it's more common now, clearly, but especially at that time, the fact that anyone from the Western world had come out and actually taken the time to try to learn, you could just be like, "Ni hao," everyone's like, "Oh, that's awesome." Everyone was just so encouraging and so supportive and so excited that you had shown any sort of interest that it made the whole thing a lot easier. Whereas, I've heard stories about people who go to Germany, and try to learn German, and it's just like, "No, you're saying that wrong." Every time you say anything, the Germans are like, "No, that's wrong. That's I've heard some really funny stories, whereas there was just everyone was so encouraging and just so excited that you'd shown enough interest to try to learn a little bit. So it was really a very warm, inviting. But the people that I was working with, I was going to these little detail shops, and I was actually doing trainings in these little detail shops. Well, these guys didn't go to college. They didn't speak a word of English. In fact, their Mandarin wasn't great. This was surprising to me because I thought, oh, China, everyone speaks Mandarin, but that's not the case. If you go to, I was in Guangdong province, it's kind of where we started. They all speak Cantonese, which is, I mean, it's a completely different language. It's the writing is very similar, but the speaking is, I mean, it's like I didn't understand a word of it. There's no similarities almost at all, and so that was a real challenge because they're speaking their second language and I'm speaking my second language, which is Mandarin, and it's just real challenging. And so I kind of thought, well, my Mandarin's not very good. Just kind of a funny story is that my distributor who was out there, I would call him on the phone and try to talk to him, and I just had the hardest time talking to this guy. I'd say something, he'd say something, I'd kind of go, I didn't get much of that. And so I would kind of confirm with him, okay, so Mr. Yu, are you saying this? You know, and then he'd be like, no, 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 no. And then he'd say something else. And I go, oh boy, okay, so Mr. Yu, are you saying this? And it basically was just a series of me guessing what I thought he might be saying and eventually guessing right. And that was kind of how our conversations went. And so I just thought, well, I just chalked it up to kind of my Mandarin's just still a little rusty, still not very good. Well, it turns out later, my other colleague who is 100% Chinese couldn't understand him either. So it turns out that it wasn't just me; it was that this guy's Mandarin was just terrible. So he had grown up in Guangdong province and just hadn't really learned Mandarin very properly. So he spoke it enough to get by, but it was just really funny experience for me to realize that China is just it's very different than say the U.S. or a lot of other countries in the sense that there's like 5,000 years of history in just one province, and so you've got a culture, a history, a language that's unique to that part of China. It's almost like the way I describe it to people is like it's almost like if all of Europe was one country, but yet you still had Spanish, German, French. You still had all of those sort of cultures and languages. That's almost what it's like, because these different provinces, these different languages and things are really very different and unique, and they go back for thousands of years. So, if you read some of the sort of ancient Chinese, poetry, it should be actually read in Cantonese, not in Mandarin, whereas other ones can be read in Mandarin and they make sense. So it's just a really interesting sort of dynamic that I had to kind of learn on the fly. And so it was a real challenge for me to kind of learn the language and also learn about car detailing and learn about polishing cars and all these things kind of all at the same time. So I kind of just got pushed in the deep end. Now I'm really grateful for that because so many people go into foreign countries and they kind of use English and they're able to kind of get by. I didn't have that option. I couldn't communicate with any of these guys because they didn't speak a word of English. And so when we sat down to dinner at the end of a training, we'd all sit down to dinner. It was all Mandarin. And I would go for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days in a row without speaking a word of English. Not a single word of English to anybody, which was pretty cool experience, and then I'd come back to Hong Kong and it was weird. Like I'd come back and then someone would say something to me in English and I'd kind of pause for a second. I mean, it took a second for the brain to kind of switch back over like, oh gosh, we're speaking English, right? Yeah. So it was a really amazing experience for me. The internship went great. Tom loved me. The team loved me. I really enjoyed what I was doing. Ended up with a full-time job and was responsible basically for the sort of greater China region. And basically spent those next few years just traveling all over to all of the major cities of China, getting to meet people from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, and different languages, cultures, and food. Man, the food, amazing. Just all the different parts of China, all the different types of food. So it was really a very, very cool experience for me to kind of get oriented to China during that period. Now later, my job kind of expanded to more of an Asia role. So I didn't spend as much time focused on China, but in those early years, that's basically all I did. It was like every major city, as Kunming, Chongqing, Chengdu, Beijing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and then all of the major cities in Guangdong province like Dongguan and Guangzhou and all these places. So I really got an opportunity to kind of see the whole country and experience it, through my work.
For this next segment, I wanted to get Anthony to share some about his experience as an entrepreneur. I say an entrepreneur because I think God has put something in him in that regard. When Anthony was still in high school, he was good at math, and there was a thought about, he could do engineering or something like that. And I just shared with him, you know what? I don't think you should go into engineering because if you're an engineer, you'll always be able to make a living. You'll be able to make a good living. But if you want to hit it big on something, you're going to have to go into business. And so I kind of discouraged him from going into engineering.
I definitely remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about maybe architecture or engineering or something, and then you were like, "Yeah, don't be an engineer."
Engineering treated me pretty well, but I knew if you were going to do something big, it would be in a business sense. And so, anyway, I just have encouraged Anthony to tell us a little bit more about his adventure as a businessman and an entrepreneur in particular.
Yeah, I think looking back now, I realized that part of the story that I shared or that I've been sharing, just in regards to my experiences in China, also had a pretty big impact on my career. And so I think that I didn't realize when I was studying business and when I was studying Chinese, I didn't really think about how that could overlap with your spiritual life. That wasn't necessarily something that anyone had spoken to me about. I always just thought you work, you make money, and then your spiritual stuff is something you do on the side. That's kind of your personal life. So I never really thought of much crossover between those two. But my first really interesting experience was as an entrepreneur. I would say I do need to mention that my first company, so to speak, or my first business that I started was when I was 14, and that was the lawn mowing, and that was very much because of your encouragement to start doing that. And even though it started very small, just mowing a few yards, kind of around, nearby, kind of within walking distance, I earned some money, and that was kind of my first experience into wow, I can work hard, make some money, and actually do something with it, which was kind of cool. And so I spent 2 summers really saving money so that I could buy my first guitar. So my first Taylor guitar, that was my dream. It took me 2 summers to save up $1,500 to be able to buy my first really nice guitar. But anyways, lawn mowing for me was a great business, very very hard work, especially in Tulsa in the summers. Wow, it is it's roasting. So difficult job, but I made great money, and that was kind of my first experience into starting and really running my own company and having to keep track of it. And you taught me how to use Excel, and how to keep track of how many yards, had I been paid or not, things like that. And so you taught me a lot about how to kind of do the initial sort of bookkeeping and keeping track of because yards have to be done every week, and so you got to kind of have a schedule. And then what if it rains? And is that
Mention Nate.
and so, I had a partner, a good friend of mine, Nathan Smith. We worked on it together. We were partners in the business, and we grew it. I mean, we got to the point where we had 50 customers, and we were actually making some really good money. In fact, I even had sort of a verbal offer to buy the company from us, which was kind of to me at the time felt pretty hilarious. But now I'm like maybe I should have. I don't know. But it was really a pretty cool business. So that was as an entrepreneur, that was my first business was lawn mowing. Really an awesome business. Now I had to abandon that when I started going to China. So between my sophomore and junior year of university is when I had to give up the lawn mowing, and didn't get the chance to do that anymore because I was gone every summer after that. But for about 5 years or so, that was a really good business, and I think that last summer I made something like $17,000. I think my last summer that I did it with 50 customers, working with a partner. It was really a good summer business. I mean, that was fantastic money, which was key for me being able to afford doing some things like flying to China and doing some of these trips. So, anyways, that was my first entrepreneur experience. Well, the next one that I wanted to note here is that the second summer that I spent in China, which would have been between my junior and senior year, I went back to Kunming. So I'd gone the summer before, which is my first summer in China, where I'd experienced some of those interesting things I'd mentioned before. Well, one of the missionaries out there, an American guy, their organization had just started a business, and their business was basically exporting sort of rare, sort of ethnic, really cool handmade, handcrafted products out of Yunnan province back to the U.S. And there were a couple of retail locations in the U.S. that were basically buying and featuring some of these really cool products with the story behind them. And so they would put them, they would have these little, say, like a handmade, one of these glass globe things that are painted from the inside. I don't know if you've seen these before, but they would actually paint them on the inside so that there was a painting, but it was actually a glass, sort of like a globe kind of looking thing. And these things were like really intricate, very detailed, beautiful sort of things. And they were made by a minority group in Yunnan province in China. So anyways, they would go and buy some of these, and then they would send them to the U.S., and then the store would put them up, and then they would take their story, and they would tell the story of these people, and then sell the products. And so my very first internship, because I had to do an internship for my business degree, I asked them. I said, "Well, this kind of, for them it was kind of a side business, but I said, could I be an intern for this business that you guys have set up?" And they were like, "Fantastic, that sounds great." So I came out that summer and basically went with them on a number
So
of
this was Tom Elder, right?
Tom Elder, exactly. Yeah. And so their organization had set up a company and it was kind of a dual purpose. There was the business elements of it, but also it provided a visa for them as well so that they could continue their ministry there. So it was kind of a neat experience. So I spent that summer, traveling with them and getting to meet some of these suppliers that they were exporting some of these like really cool wood, like furniture pieces and things like that. It was almost like I think as an American, you'd think of like Pier 1 Imports. It was kind of that sort of feel, not nearly as big as that, but sort of that kind of feel where it's just unique items that were kind of brought in. And they had this interesting story behind them. And so I spent that summer doing that. Didn't make any money for me. I was just an intern. But it definitely was my first, I guess, realization that business could be more than just business. That, this idea that, well, actually, I could have a business that actually that serves another purpose. Where yes, it's a business. Yes, it makes money. Yes, it's cool products. Yes, there's a customer who wants this, but it also serves another purpose in terms of the people who are involved in the business. So that was really pretty significant for me, actually, that it kind of opened my eyes to that possibility. And later I ended up, in Hong Kong, taking a full-time job, working, as I mentioned before, in car detailing products. So polishes, compounds, waxes, all of the professional and sort of DIY products that were made in the U.S. and then we were importing them into Asia, into China, different countries. So that was the business that I was in, and it was kind of later, being based in Hong Kong. I met Hong Kong's an amazing place where there's a great concentration of just incredible talent. Nobody sends you to Hong Kong to work unless you're really good at something because it's very expensive to live there. Salaries are high, cost of living is high. So everyone that you kind of meet there, it's like a lot of people are in finance, a lot of people are in different types of businesses, different corporates and whatnot. But nobody's there unless they're really good at something because no one would spend the money to send someone there unless there was a really good reason to do so. So the people that you meet in Hong Kong, certainly at that time, were all kind of like high achieving, smart, kind of, driven type of people. So I met a lot of really cool people there. And in the midst of that, one of my colleagues, along with a couple of other guys, had an idea to start a company. And they wanted to start an e-com, basically selling online. And their idea was to take interesting products from Asia and sell them online. And so that was kind of the concept. And he kind of reached out to me. He's like, "Well, what do you think about this? Would you want to be involved?" And at first I kind of thought, I don't really have a great interest in online business. It didn't really appeal to me. But then I kind of remembered that there was this experience, that internship that I had done, where there was this retail company that was basically bringing in these really cool handmade products and then having a story behind them. And the story behind them was what made them special and unique. And so that idea kind of stuck with me. And so I kind of said to him, well, what if the products had a story behind them? And then that was kind of the focus of our business, is that we could find products that had a cool story and then use that as kind of the marketing piece. And he loved that idea. And so his whole thing was kind of the eco side. I wasn't maybe as interested in the eco side of things, but I was more interested in the help to humans, so to speak, more than help to the environment, and economic benefit and things like that. So, anyways, we kind of put those two pieces together and said, well, what if we start an e-com company and all of the products that we feature have a cool story behind them? Either they're good for the environment or they're good for people. And then we'll use that as our way to kind of just find basically really cool people who are making really interesting products with really interesting stories, and then we'll feature that and sell them. And so we kind of put this idea together, and we started the company. The company was called Fat Rice, which is PHAT, so fat meaning kind of like cool, and then rice, obviously being that we're in Asia, bit of a silly name, but it's kind of what we landed on. So we started this website, and the idea was that we're going to just go out there and basically kind of going back to my experience, as an intern that summer, which was to go out and source really interesting products. We just started researching and looking for really cool, interesting products that we thought we could sell online. And we found some really amazing stuff. For example, we found a group that was collecting bullet casings from the Khmer Rouge, left over from the war that had happened there, and then melting them down and turning them into jewelry. And I think the brand was called Bullets to Beauty, something like that. I mean, wow, what a story! Really, it was put together by a designer. So this lady had really designed these are very nice jewelry. Like, it was really a really nice branding and a nice idea. And so we said, well, let's feature your brand. So we took great photos of all the products and featured them on the website. And we did the same thing basically across many different types of products. Could be things like reusable water bottles that were made out of eco-friendly materials. Anything that had kind of a cool story behind it. We're like, we'll feature your brand on our website, and then try to sell it essentially. Well, in order to do that, we needed money, and so the first big challenge that we had was to raise money. And so I'd never done that before. I'd never really. I was good at sales. I understood how to sell things, but I'd never raised money before. And so that was a very, very new experience to me. I'd never written, an investment agreement before. This was entirely new to me. And I remember starting to pitch my idea to a few people in Hong Kong, and they kind of helped me to build the business plan. And it was quite a difficult process to do this, especially since I had a full-time job. This was all being done kind of on the side. So we kind of put this business plan together, and we're kind of putting the nuts and bolts together on it. How much is it how much money do we really need, in order to really get this thing going? What's our click-through rate going to be like? Unfortunately, my colleague was really into the whole online, social media advertising. That's what he did for the company that we were working for. And so he was very experienced on that side. And so I had to basically learn how to do that, and started meeting with people. And I'll never forget this one story I like to tell people is I met with a guy. He's an American guy living in Hong Kong who was doing business, with China and back and forth and things. And he said to me, I sat down and I kind of pitched him the whole thing, thinking he might be interested, because we were looking for investment of like $10,000 from 10 different people. We were like, we need about $100,000 to kind of get the proof of concept, get the website built, and kind of get the proof of concept going. And so I was pitching to people, going, let's get 10 people each for $10,000. That's not too much to ask, kind of thing. So I pitched it to him, and he was not interested himself. And I said, well, I'm gonna kind of reach out to my network. He said, well, who's your network? I'm like, well, I know people in China. I have former colleagues and former distributors that people that I know. And he said to me, I'll never forget. He goes, well, he said, I can tell you for sure, you're never going to get anyone from mainland China to invest in your company. This is what he said to me. He said, believe me, I've tried. He said they just you can't get a mainland Chinese person to invest in your company. And I don't know. I kind of took that as a personal challenge, maybe. So it's like, well, I don't know if I believe you, man. But anyways, fast forward a couple of months later, and our first investor was from China. He was a guy, and he invested $50,000. So the first investor that I brought in was a guy who had been a former distributor for the company I'd worked for before, and we just had stayed in contact. Just a really cool guy. His family was living in Canada, and he was very open-minded. Kind of a open-minded business guy, smart business guy. and he had money, to invest, and I knew that. And so I just, went up there and met with him, and he's like, "Hey, I believe in you. I like what you're doing. Let's do it." So he invested $50,000, and then we raised some money from family and friends. My colleague, his father-in-law invested. You guys invested a bit. So we kind of just pieced together, about $100,000 worth of investment to get the proof of concept going. And the guy that we had brought in to build our website turns out was not very good at it. And so our first iteration was a complete failure. We spent something like $30,000 to build a website, and it just was a total flop. It just did not work, didn't do the stuff we needed it to do. And eventually we had to make a tough decision to part ways with him because he was one of the three founders. And so we parted ways with him, and then I had to hire in another guy who didn't really know a lot about websites, but he's like, well, I'll learn, And so he kind of came in and he built this website for us, the first iteration of it, at least enough to get a proof of concept going. And then we just started transacting. We just started finding interesting brands. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work. Some products went well, some didn't go well. We had a couple of corporates because a lot of the big companies like to do their CSR, stuff. So they're like, "Hey, we like your eco-friendly water bottles here. Can we put our logo on the side and then use them for this event?" I'm like, sure, we'll figure something out. So I found a printer who could print on bottles, and so we found ways, and kind of slowly, built the business up. But we burned through $100,000 pretty quickly, as you can imagine, because we were taking on inventory, and we had like bamboo fiber T-shirts that we had brought in. We were trying to sell, and turns out T-shirts are a little bit hard to sell online if you can't touch it and feel it. And then we started going to weekend markets, and at these weekend markets we would set up, and we just sold gangbusters. We sold so much stuff at these weekend markets. Everyone loved us, but some stuff didn't sell well online. And so we were still kind of learning, the whole process. Well, eventually we did raise a little bit more money, but we got to the point where it's like, okay, the next step for us is going to be a big step. We're going to have to, I'm going to have to focus on this full time, because at that time I was still working a full-time job and just doing this on the side. And so we said we're going to need really a couple $1,000,000, at this point to really take it to the next level. And so we started reaching out to bigger investors, and that was a whole new experience for me, to go from sort of family and friends and former to now pitching to like venture capital funds, and going into, and I'll never forget one of the meetings. I got a opportunity to pitch to a fund in Hong Kong, and I got in there and gave the presentation, and I was like, man, that went really well. I felt like it went great. And the guy at the end of the presentation just goes, well, this whole, eco or conscious consuming thing, he says, it's just a fad. He said it's going to go away probably in 5 years. So yeah, certainly not something we'd be interested in. And that was the end of the meeting. It's just like, okay, I guess that didn't go so well. So I got in front of as many as I could. We got help also from the Hong Kong government. Also has kind of an entrepreneur, startup sort of network, Startup HK. They helped us a lot. We got into some newspapers and got some opportunities to pitch to people. I had one guy come in who had invested in some startups, and he came into our office and kind of met the team, and he was like, wow, and then I presented to him. He goes, well, you guys are pretty small here, so I don't think I'd want to invest. It doesn't feel very secure to me, like, well, it's a startup, man, like, of course it is. So it was hard. It was quite a difficult journey to do that. But we did finally get a commitment from an investor for $1,000,000, which was really exciting. And because of that, we had another investor who owned an insurance company, and he really liked the idea that we were doing. And so he said, because that other investor is putting in $1 million, I'll put in $1 million. So we got to our $2 million. And so that was really exciting. And it just, that was just a great moment. We were all just really jazzed up about that. Well, long story short, once it finally came down to kind of getting the contract finalized with that first investor, she actually had some extenuating circumstances that surprisingly kind of got her into some trouble. I guess she was kind of a celebrity, and so she ended up in trouble with some of her fans and whatnot. I'm not sure the whole story. Anyway, she pulled out, and so here we were. We spent all of our money. We were complete. I mean, at that point, I was using my own salary to kind of subsidize keeping some of our staff on board, just waiting for this kind of thing to come together. And so, long story short, is it just we waited as long as we could, and we couldn't wait any longer. And so I reached out to the other investor again. I said, this other one, I just don't think it's going to happen. He said, well, I'm not in if they're not in. And so in one blow, we lost all of it basically. So we had drugged this thing on as long as we could, but at that point, we had no other, major significant investors, and so it's one of the hardest things I've had to do after spending, about 2 years, working on it. And it wasn't just that I'd spent a lot of time working on it. It was that it's something that I really believed in. And the people that we were working with, as I mentioned, there's some other great examples of people who were helping. For example, we make coffee beans, and these coffee beans are from what was it, Timur area, very impoverished area. Women who had been in a difficult economic situation were basically making these coffee beans, and we were helping to sell them. Really cool story. One of my favorites was a group out of China, in fact, that were rescued. They basically rescued women who had been tricked into or forced into prostitution. Not just it was in different parts of Asia. They had 3 or 4 different branches, and so they would teach them how to make jewelry. So they would kind of rescue these women out of essentially sex trafficking, and then they would teach them how to make jewelry and give them a job. And then during that process, they would go. It was a Christian organization. They would teach them life skills. And they would teach them, and also go through a bit of a healing process. And the idea was that after about a year or so, they could kind of get back into society, get a job, and be equipped to kind of get their life, going again. And that to me was just like, to be able to sell. Eden Ministry was the name of that group. That was just amazing to me. That really, really struck me. I was like, this business is not just buying and selling jewelry and making money. It's actually totally changing the lives of these people involved. And there were so many awesome examples of that of different companies that we were working with. And so for me to give up on Fat Rice felt like I was giving up on all of that, because these were things I really believed in. And that was a really, really difficult failure. I mean, it was a failure, but it was a very difficult one because I put, 2 years of really hard work into it, and a lot of my own money, and a lot of other people's money, people that I would never be able to pay back. And that was a really difficult, experience for me. But, I learned a lot from that. I learned, they say it's, what's the old saying is fail fast. The idea is that failure is good because you learn from it. And that's easy to say. It's a lot harder to go through. But that was definitely, for me, very formative in terms of it forced me to no longer just be a sales guy working, for a corporate in a sales function or in a management function, but also to learn all of these other skills like how do I raise investment? How do I write an investment agreement? What are the different ways that you can structure an investment agreement, for example, things like a convertible loan. These are all concepts I'd never heard of before, so there's a lot of things that I took from that in terms of, and also just the accounting, the finance, the side of the business that I'd never really had to deal with before working for a corporate. And so that was really difficult to walk away from that. It still hurts a little bit because when I think about it now, I still think it's a good idea. That's one of the hard things is like, I think if we weren't in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is such a small market, I think if we'd have been in a place like the U.S. or just a bigger market, maybe we could have been successful. I don't know. I'll always wonder. But to me, it still kind of irks me because I feel like, man, that really was a good idea, and I really liked all of the brands and products that we were supporting. So that's hard, and that kind of hangs over you. But that was very important for me. Important experience for me, an important failure, which kind of formed maybe the next opportunities that came for me after that.
The reason I asked Anthony to go down this path and share about his entrepreneurial experiences is because you've probably heard that 9 out of 10 startup businesses fail. And you've probably also heard that most entrepreneurs experience several failures before they have a success. Some maybe never get to the success. They fail on the first one and give up. But I just wanted Anthony to share about his entrepreneurial experiences. This was the first one.
Wasn't my last failure. That was, and at that time, to have that fail was really difficult. And then, at that time, I was also the smaller company that I've been working for got bought by a very, very large company. Very large company. We're talking 90,000 employees, global, $30 billion company. So I had kind of become an employee of this very large company. And I had learned through that, I'd learned a lot of really good things through that process, just about how corporates work and how to kind of navigate the whole political, thing that happens inside of corporates. But I knew that I did not like it. I did not enjoy the political dance that you kind of had to do. I've always been a little bit like my dad, I guess. I've always been a bit more of a straightforward person. I like to say things how I see them, and I like to be honest with people, and I like to just find solutions to problems. And so being in a corporate world was really hard. Just to give you a funny example, one of the first meetings after the acquisition happened, my new boss, who had worked in this big corporate for many years, he came in, and then we flew to Shanghai, which is where we visited with the branch of this corporate that we were meeting with. And so we got into our first meeting, and we're at a table of about 10 people, and I'm sitting next to my new boss, and this guy just starts saying stuff about our business. Now, I had been working on developing the China business for many years at that point, and so I had a real, emotional connection to the business, because I had all of these distributors that we were working with. I had personally been the ones to train them, to build them up, to encourage them, to get them to invest. So I had built this really with my own hands. And so it felt very personal to me. So we get into this first meeting, and this guy just starts saying, well, this business needs to be changed like this, and this isn't right, and that's not right, and this product thing isn't right, and I was just like, who does this guy think he is? It's just this feeling of like, he doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. I'm the one who's spent the last sort of 6 or 7 years of my life building this thing. And so I'm like incensed, that this guy has no idea what he's talking about. So he kind of finishes this little spiel, and I start to go, and I'm geared up, man. I've been sitting there like, oh man, here I go, And I open my mouth to start to say something, and my new boss just starts kicking me under the table. He starts kind of kicking my leg, like, just don't say anything. And I was, I kind of had to eat my words, which was hard to do. And so, but I did. I was like, okay, fine. So I didn't say anything. And then the meeting ended, and my new boss said to me, he said, I told you not to say anything. I was kicking you because I said, don't waste your time. He said, these guys don't make any important decisions. None of their opinions matter to anybody. So there's just no point in trying to confront them about any of the things that they said. I was like, oh, okay. So when does it matter? He goes, well, we've got a meeting later this afternoon. That one's going to matter. Just to me, like, this was kind of my first experience of like the corporate world, like I was kind of in over my head. I just didn't understand. I'm like, you're in a meeting and someone says something wrong. You just go, well, I disagree with that. And then you explain why. That was just my concept. He's like, no, that's not how it works here. We don't step on any toes. We just navigate around all the people that don't matter. And then when we get to the decision makers, those are the guys that we focus on saying the important things to in the right way at the right time, So anyway, I just knew it was a great experience. I learned a lot from it. But maybe my biggest takeaway was, this is not for me. And I think the moment that I knew it wasn't for me was when I paused and just thought, where does my career go from here? And I looked at all the people around me, my boss, my boss's boss, their boss, this person, that lead of this organization, that lead of this region, that business development manager, all the people that were kind of above me or in positions that I could be maybe someday. I didn't want to be any of them. Like I couldn't look at anybody and go, I want to be that guy someday. Or I hope that someday I can get to that point. I just looked at all of them and I was like totally uninspired. And that's kind of how I knew this just isn't for me. This whole, corporate politicking thing. There are some people who are just so good at this. And I saw that. There were people that they thrive in that sort of environment and they loved it. And it just wasn't for me. So I kind of knew that that was going to be the case for me, and that was kind of what had the initial pull I think that I had to start Fat Rice was because of that, because I knew this kind of in my nature. I just knew this is not going to work for me, and so that was why I had kind of looked at being an entrepreneur and starting my own thing. And so after the failure of Fat Rice, I was basically just back to the corporate life again, and that was depressing, to be honest. I mean, it just was that was a difficult. I had a very difficult year during that time where Fat Rice essentially failed. My job, I was completely uninspired, didn't enjoy it. Hated every meeting that I went to. It just was a really hard time. So that was I knew that I needed to do something different. I just knew it in my bones. I've got to do something different. This isn't going to work for me. So that's when I had the next idea. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I can do what I do now, which is essentially helping a US company bring their products into Asia. Maybe I can do that, but I could do it as an independent. And I had learned this business model from my very first boss that I'd had in Hong Kong, because that's how he had worked with the brand that we were representing. So I had that idea. Problem is, I had a no compete clause in my contract because I was at a managerial level at this corporate. I couldn't compete with the company, and this company makes a lot of products, and I didn't know how strict they would be with it, but I just didn't want to take the risk. So I thought, okay, I'll start my own company. I'll basically use this business model where I will be an independent agent, and I will help U.S. brands to bring their products into Asia, but I'll do it in a totally different industry, because that was the automotive industry. So I got to do a totally different industry, and so I started kind of fishing around. My wife and I had decided that we wanted to leave Hong Kong. She was certainly eager to leave Hong Kong after having our daughter. We found it a little bit difficult to live there just because space is very challenged, cost of living is very, very high, and she always kind of wanted to move somewhere else, and I liked Hong Kong. But when I realized that in order to start my own company, especially if I was going to do this sort of business model, it was going to be just me, and if I lost the income that I had from my corporate, we couldn't survive, and I just knew, like, we're not going to make it if we stay in Hong Kong. So she had family in Thailand, so we decided, let's relocate to Thailand. So we left Hong Kong, we left everything. I'd been there for close to 11 years. It was a very difficult decision, to leave and to move to an entirely new country. I don't speak a word of Thai. It was a very different thing, but our cost of living went down something like 60 or 70%. So it was a massive, improvement in terms of our cost of living, and actually our standard of life went up as well. It's wild when you leave a place that's very expensive and move to a place like Thailand. It's very eye opening when you realize the cost of living is so different. So we did that, and then I had already communicated with a client in Thailand, that because Thailand is very famous for rubber. There's a lot of rubber farms, rubber plantations, and one of the products that comes out of that is latex. So latex rubber, which is turned into foam. So all of our kind of the premium mattresses that you buy have this natural latex foam in them, which is purely just a natural product that's produced primarily in Thailand, and then is put into mattresses and is exported. It's a very, very cool product. Anyways, there were a lot of companies that were manufacturers that did that. And so through Joyce's family connections, I had gotten connected to a guy who was a Christian, and they had a very large manufacturing capability, and they were basically making this latex foam and selling it to other companies, but had never developed their own brand before. So, but they wanted to. So it kind of felt like the right timing. So it's like, okay. So I said, well, I know how to do brand building. I've already done it for Fat Rice, right? Starting from zero. We can design the products, we can make a catalog, we can do all this stuff. But it's going to cost us this much money. And then the way my business model works is I take a commission of the sales. But I can't sell the product until we have it. So I said, you're going to have to cover basically this amount of money, basically roughly $10,000 a month, which is going to cover all of the cost of our branding, photo shoots for catalogs, building the first catalog, building the first website, a lot of stuff that was going to have to be done. And I was going to utilize some of the resources that I had previously used for Fat Rice. So I was kind of putting some pieces together. And so I pitched him on the whole idea, and he's like, I love it. Let's do it. I want to have our own brand instead of just selling OEM. I want to have our own brand. And so we did that. And so I quit my job, and that was kind of I took that as kind of my sign of like, okay, let's do this thing. So I quit. We moved from Hong Kong to Thailand, and I started working with this client immediately. And the first month they paid, and the second month they did not pay, and they never paid us again after that. So we spent, a good sort of almost 6 months really, and they never really paid us after that. I think we got paid for 2 months worth of work out of 6 months. And at that point, they just, for internal reasons, not related to us, they just kind of had a change of heart. And maybe they just didn't realize the amount of work that was going to go into building your own brand. You have to go to expos, you have to go to shows, you have to actually spend money to get your brand out in front of people, so that you can get retailers and others around the region interested. And so, long story short, is 6 months in, we had gotten paid 2 months out of 6 months, and it was a disaster. So I had no income, from my corporate gig anymore, and we had just been spending money basically, to try to get this thing kind of up and running. Well, we never got it to the point where we could actually start selling it, so we never could really make any commission on it. We sold a little bit, but it was never really enough to kind of get the thing going. And so that was kind of our next big failure. And at that point, we ended up through that process, and then trying to, of course, find other clients, eventually ended up pretty significantly in debt. It was about 40,000 US in debt, I think, by the time, things really turned around. And in the midst of that, there was COVID, that hit as well. But eventually I did find another client, that turned out to be a lot better, and got that going. But eventually I got the opportunity during COVID, to get back into the automotive industry. Well, at that point, it had been 3 years, so my no-compete clause had already expired. And so I had an opportunity, and a former colleague from the previous company who'd moved to a new company reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, would you be interested in this? And it was just the right timing. And so I said, yeah. So we had a call, and kind of came together, and it turned out to be a really awesome client, great brand, really just nicely poised, ready to kind of launch into some different markets in Asia, and it's turned into a great client. So anyways, starting off with a massive, failure like that, and then eventually getting another client, which was better, but then, ultimately getting this newer client, which turned out to be a really great program. So, but I look back and I go, why did I have to fail? Why couldn't the timing have just worked out so that I didn't have to go through that? But the way I look at it is I go, if I had still been working, and during that process, when I mentioned that first major failure and being in debt, I had job opportunities. So I had in Bangkok, I had a headhunter who, I don't know, somehow tracked me down and started basically lining me up for interviews with some different companies, and which were interesting. And I actually did a few interviews, and I actually got an offer that was a pretty good offer, at least by Bangkok standards. And they basically, but I had already started kind of discussing with this latest client, but I didn't have anything written in stone. But anyways, I just felt, they made me an offer, and they said, look, we have to know by Friday if you're going to do this or not. And I just was like, I'm sorry, I just can't. I can't do it. I said, I've got my own company. I've got, I'm not ready to give up on it just yet. And I don't know, I can't really explain why I felt that way, but I just knew that I couldn't give up on this just yet. I don't know why. And then, as I mentioned, some other things kind of came together, and now, that the company is doing well. Certainly not without its challenges here and there, but we've now got a business that's going well. I've got 2 full-time employees, 2 part-time employees, and the business is growing. So yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of it's an interesting, all of those failures, that I experienced, all kind of contributed to the knowledge that I needed. For example, even for this new company, I had to raise money again. And so I even went back to some of those same investors and said, hey, would you give me a second chance? Let's try a different business model. And some of them said yes. And so that's they were kind of stepping stones. So those failures, did kind of lead to, eventually where I am today. And I'm really, grateful looking back, that I'd gone through those things and learned those lessons. I wish that I could. You always wish you could learn things in a way that didn't hurt, but I don't know. God does things in a certain way, and I just think that he's been faithful. And yeah, my perspective is that the goal for me is not to make a bunch of money. That's not really the goal. The goal for me is to live a certain life. I want to be a great husband. I want to be a great father. I want to be a great friend. I want to be involved in supporting my community, my church. Those are things that really I value very highly, and I want my work to support that. I want my work to work for me. That's kind of the phrase that people like to throw in. I want my work to work for me. And so the great thing about this business model is that it frees me up and it gives me, even though it's not the type of business that's really going to make me rich, because it's still commission based, sales based. There's always kind of not a cap, but there's a limitation to how much you can scale that. Whereas some businesses, if it's based on technology or whatever, you can kind of sell it and make a big pot of money, and it'd be great. I can't ever sell my company because my company is me. And so I can't, there's no sort of like big exit strategy where I can someday cash in on this business that I've made. But the way that it works, that it provides a lot of freedom for me, where nobody tells me when I have to travel, what day I have to travel, where I have to be, when I have to be there. No one's looking over my shoulder. I'm basically servicing my clients, helping them to achieve the things they want to achieve in the Asia market. But I do that, they basically just trust me to do it because they know I'm on commission. So if I don't sell, I don't get anything. And so it's a really nice way to have it set up where I don't need someone chasing me down, looking over my shoulder. What do are you working hard or not? Because I have all the motivation that I need. And that gives me the freedom and flexibility to then travel, go to events I want to do, be where I want to be. And then, if my daughter has an event or something, I need to take a half a day off, I don't have to ask anybody for permission. And so that's the big, I think, part of the way my business is structured now, is that it gives me that flexibility to be very involved with my family, with my kids, and also with our church and our community, and it gives me the opportunity to, and hopefully even more so, as we go forward, to be involved in helping. Last year had a guy from Ukraine. Obviously, we all know what's happened in Ukraine. Who came through Bangkok, and I got to help him with his business, and I gave, I invested money in his business, and I helped him get it set up, and I just helped him, and he was just blown away. Like, I don't know why you're helping me like this. And I was like, man, I'm getting as much out of this as you are. I really enjoy this sort of thing. This is why I've structured my company the way I have, is so that I have the freedom and time to be able to help someone like yourself, who's a young entrepreneur, whose family is obviously massively impacted. Obviously, you don't want to go back to Ukraine because you probably end up, fighting in this war. And so, anyways, it's those kinds of things where I hope that in the future I'll be able to do more and more of. And the business that I've got now will support that. And so I think that's what's most exciting about it.
So I just want to go back for a moment. During the time that you were moving from Hong Kong to Thailand, you moved to Bangkok while you were still working for the large corporation still.
Yeah.
And there was a whole story behind that. I just wanted you to share that.
Yeah, this is I've shared this with a few of my friends, and people who have gone through some difficult transitions in business. This is something that I like to share with them. It's a lesson that I learned the hard way, and that's that the year that I was working for the corporate, and I felt like that God had spoken to me to leave at the end of the year. This is your last 2017. This is your last year. Go ahead and just tell your boss. Go ahead and tell whoever that this is your last year. And that's not something you typically do. I think it's like 30 days notice is the standard that was in my contract. You got to give 1 month notice. And I just felt like God say, this is it. This is your last year. Go ahead and tell everyone, December 31st, you're done, And that's what I felt. And so that's what I told my boss at the time. I said, this is it. This is my last year. I'm going to start my own company. And this is I'm gonna finish there. But I was obviously very nervous about that, knowing that that's when my income was then going to cut off. But I, uh, I felt a clear conviction about that. Well, then fast forward a couple of months, and my boss got fired slash retired, forced out. I'm not really sure what happened, but somehow he suddenly was not in the picture anymore, which was a big surprise. And this happened in like October, so I was meant to be, and we had already started our move to Thailand at that time, and then my boss suddenly was out of the picture, which meant that his job maybe was opening up. And so I think in my own pride, perhaps, I don't know exactly, but I just had this sense of like, I wonder if I could get his job, and I think for me it's a pride thing because I'd worked so long in the company that I felt like, well, I've earned it. I've earned to be in that job. That's and I think I was probably lacking a sense of appreciation maybe from the company. So I think I was maybe looking for some appreciation perhaps. Anyway, so he left in October, and they kind of said, I said, well, what's the kind of the situation? And they said, well, we know that you were planning to leave at the end of the year. And I said, yeah, I am. And anyways, they kind of said, well, would you be willing to kind of stay on a little bit, considering that your boss has now left? And I was like, boy, it'd be nice to have a little more income. And I thought, I just wonder if they're going to offer me that job, and to me, it was kind of a validation thing where I thought, I'd love to, even if I don't take it, I'd love to just be offered that job. And I kind of stayed on and didn't know what was going to happen, but I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to, and really it was kind of a selfish thing. It was just, I'm going to get a little bit more out of this company. I'm just going to squeeze them I had already moved at that time to Thailand. There was no way for me to continue in the job I was in. And the job that my old boss had was based in Singapore. And I wasn't about to move to Singapore. We just moved to Thailand. So there was no real opportunity for me to continue with the company, but they were still paying me. And so I thought, well, maybe I can just nurse this for a little bit more. So I ended up not leaving at the end of the year. I ended up kind of staying on for another month and then kind of another month after that. But I was already completely focused on my new business, and I was really kind of just taking advantage a little bit. I was still helping, yes, I was still doing some things, but anyways, I share that because what happened next was very kind of painful and would have been completely avoidable had I just obeyed what God had kind of told me, which was finish at the end of the year. You're going to finish on a positive note. You've told everyone what you're doing. It's like everything will be clean and clear. Well, because I stayed on, then this other lady got involved who really didn't like me. She got kind of promoted into a position. And in that sort of January, February time, she got involved somehow. And I guess curried some favor with the new leader of the company. And I guess poisoned the water. I don't know what she said, but suddenly it was like, there's no way we would consider hiring you for that position. And in fact, we'd be happy if you just go ahead and resign. That's kind of what happened. And that was shocking to me. Here, I'd spent 10 years of my life working for this company, so, and I was by far the most qualified person to be running the Asia business. And then to have this kind of, now it's after when I had said I was going to leave, I'd stayed on. And then basically I got forced out by this lady who for some reason never liked me. I don't know why. I never did figure that out, but she had gotten promoted and then she said some things. And anyways, they were like, you know what? We want you to go ahead and just resign like you said you were going to. Well, that was really painful, to have done everything that I did. And then to eventually just be forced out like that was a very painful experience for me. And that happened in sort of February. So I ended up staying for an additional 2 months. So yes, I got 2 months of additional income, but I can tell you that the emotional baggage that I walked away with from that was significant because I was very angry at that whole thing happening and the way and it was very unfair, and I probably have every right to feel that way, but it didn't matter. What mattered is that now I left the company with this terrible taste in my mouth, very angry, very upset, And really for months and months after that, even to this day, I still feel a little something because of the way that it ended. If I had just obeyed and I had just done what I said I was going to do, which was leave at the end of the year, God spoke to me clear. I felt like leave at the end of the year, none of that would have happened. So I gained 2 months of additional income, yes, but I can tell you that it was not worth it for what ended up going down and how that whole thing fell apart. So it's a story that I like to tell people who are kind of in a similar situation where they're like, well, I feel like maybe I need to do something else, or maybe they're just trying to take advantage of a situation that they're in. I tell them the story because I go, look, you got to understand. I know we're all business people and we've all been told you shouldn't have feelings, you shouldn't have emotions, don't let all that get. But the truth is, we're all humans and we all have emotions, and these things matter. And so if you and I have another friend who's a very close friend of mine who's also in business, had a similar sort of thing happen where he kind of overstayed, didn't like the situation, but just kind of stuck with it, and then got in a fight with the old boss and just left on this terrible, terrible note. I'm like, that's like, put money aside for a second. Like, you have to then carry that around with you. And that's the part that people don't really talk about much is the emotional baggage that comes from making poor decisions. Or in this case, I would say disobeying what I felt like God had spoken to me. And that's almost always the case, is that if you're in a business situation and you disobey what you feel your conviction is, or maybe what God's spoken to you, whether that's clearly or through different ways. Like if in your conscience you know that you should do one thing and you do something different, or you get angry and yell at someone instead of handling it in the right way, there are ramifications to that. And just because you think you got angry and then it's like, oh well, I said something to that person who upset me. You're like, and so did that help? Well, no. It's like, do you feel better? Kinda. It's like, well, you won't feel better because that's going to now hang with you for the rest of your life. And you're going to remember that situation, and the things that they said back to you are going to haunt you, for years to come. And so it's those sorts of things that you have to understand, that if you obey what you feel like the conviction is you have that God's spoken to you about, then you don't end up with all this baggage. And that's, similar to, the client that I had mentioned to you when I first started my company that totally let me down. I had a client that just totally let me down, and I had worked hard, and done everything that I'd said I was going to do. And they just were like, nah, they're just going to pull the rug out. And I was like, man, I'm going to take these guys to court. They owed me something like $40,000. And I was like, I could take these guys to court. And the truth is that I could have. But God, the Holy Spirit, spoke to me in that moment and said, let it go. Just let it go. And I was like, but they owe me all this money. Like, how can I have no money. I'm in debt. Like, I need this money. And I just felt God say, no, you need to let this one go. And so I agreed to a termination agreement, and basically, had to forego the money that they owed me. And it was so hard, because I was so angry at them, for having basically promised this in this contract, and then for them to pull out of the contract, they owed me these things, and they basically said no to all of it, and I agreed to it. And it was really hard to do that. But I tell you what, I don't think about it. I moved on. I've had new clients since then. I barely think about it. And I know that if I'd taken them to court, maybe I could have gotten some money, maybe not. I don't know. But it would have turned into a very bitter thing, and it would have turned into a very difficult back and forth, and it would have cost me maybe at least months, if not years of my life, to get what? To get maybe, what if I got $10,000 for $10,000? I mean, it's like, you have to understand that there's an emotional element to these things that you have to take into account as well. There's an emotional toll that comes with, I would say, disobeying the voice of the Lord, or the direction or the conviction that you have to do things in a godly way. When you stray from that, there's always an emotional toll that comes from that, and that's what I kind of try to share with people, is that you gotta factor that in, because in the end business we talk a lot about dollars and cents, like, oh, this money is that money, but you're like, there's an emotional element to all of this, and for you as an entrepreneur and for you as a Christian, it's just as important for you to have freedom in your emotions and in your mind and in your spirit as it is to have the finances. You have to weigh these things up, because it doesn't, how many people do you see who are successful at business who are miserable people? There's a lot of them. There's a lot of people out there. Their marriages have fallen apart. Their kids hate them. They divorced. And there's all sorts of people who've been very successful in their business, but their personal life is in complete shambles. And that's I don't think what God's called us to. So success, in my mind, is not just making money and getting rich someday and having a nice house and nice cars and kids go to nice schools and stuff. That's not success to me. Success is that I'm navigating my life in a way where I'm honoring the Lord and I am not having to carry around a bunch of emotional baggage, which affects not only me, but my wife and my kids and my family and my friends and all the people around me in a negative way. Because now I have all this extra stress and really bitterness and unforgiveness that I'm now carrying around because of these things that have happened. So I just think that, and every situation is different, but I think that there's a wisdom to that I've gained from going through some of these failures and in the one case, disobeying what I felt like God told me to do, and then the emotional baggage and weight that came with that took me probably months, if not years, to kind of deal with, versus the other case where I just obeyed, even though it went against everything that made sense at the time, and then being able to walk away clean and like, hey, I'm just ready for the next thing. And sure enough, the next thing came, and I was ready for it, and I didn't have the emotional baggage and things. So I think that that's an example that I use of sometimes it doesn't make business sense to do what God asks you to do, but it is the best thing for you. And because you are an entrepreneur, you are the business. You are and ultimately, as Christians, you have to understand like God's goal for us is not for us to make. God doesn't need our money. I mean, really, does God need our money? But God wants us to be a part of His kingdom, and so there's a really exciting role that we can play, but we have to play the role that God has in front of us. Because if you don't and you try to do your own thing, there's going to be friction. There's going to be strife, essentially, that comes out of that. And yeah, you might make some money, but then what? What's the point of that if say your personal life is falling apart, your mental health is falling apart, your family's falling apart, and I've just seen a lot of cases of that. And in the business world, there's a lot of people who are very driven and yes, are very successful. But I look at them, I go, yeah, but I don't want to be that guy. And I think that's a wisdom maybe that's come from just some of the experiences that I've had, having done it the wrong way and having done it the right way and seeing the difference between.
That's cool. As we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking back to your whole lifespan. You were a very fussy baby. You cried a lot for 9 months. You did not sleep through the night until you were 3. I can remember every night you would wake up crying, and your mom and I would have to decide whose turn is it to get up with Anthony. And it finally got to where this is in England, I would walk into your room and you'd be kind of crying there in your crib, and I wouldn't get you out. I would just lay my hand on you and just kind of wait. And then eventually you would go back to sleep. And then that went on until sometime when you were 3, when you started actually sleeping through the night. But even when you started sleeping through the night, you would wake up with a massive dirty diaper, and it was just kind of like, oh, okay, who's going to get up with Anthony and sort this out? And as parents, you go through all these things. You don't have any idea what your kid is going to turn out like, and your mom and I followed your journey very closely, obviously. And I just want to say we were so pleased with the things that you've done. And sometimes when we have our long phone calls and talk about your business, I'm thinking to myself, when did my son learn all this stuff about business? He's talking about stuff that I've never done. I don't know anything about because I was an engineer and a project manager. But it's very impressive to us what you've done. And we went through the travails of the business failures with you, and during COVID, when you lost that client you were speaking of, and you were basically living on fumes, and those were trying times for us as well to watch you go through these things. But your mom and I are so proud of what you've done and what you've become. You and your family with 2 children now, and we're just so pleased. So makes all the pain seem small by comparison. And I just want to say I'm so pleased by the fact that you're still following the Lord. You're still listening to what God is saying to you, and I love the way your spiritual journey and your journey as an entrepreneur just kind of weaves together into a mesh, and that's really the way life is. It all meshes together. If you're a believer and you're following Christ, your business life and your spiritual life all meshes together. So, any final words for any young entrepreneurs out there who are thinking about going into business?
It's not for the faint of heart. I can say that. When I look back, I don't know. There are moments where I go, I don't know why I stuck with that. And if I was really thinking about it, I would go, that was kind of silly that I did this or that, or that I stuck with this or I stuck with that. So, but I think ultimately it comes down to finding peace. This is kind of the way I look at it. Is a lot of people say like, well, how do you know when God's speaking to you? Because sometimes it can be very clear. There can be moments where I feel very clear about things. Sometimes it's through a friend or a pastor or other people, but ultimately, I think no matter what you do, you've got to find God's peace. And I believe that if you're doing something, because God has put a lot of things in us, drives and our own, everyone's personalities are different, everyone's skills are different, everyone's intuitions are different. It's really down to there is no. I'm always very hesitant to be like, well, I did it this way, you should do it this way, and I don't really tell people that. Although I'm certainly happy to share my experiences, but it really comes down to you have to be obedient to the peace, finding the peace of the Holy Spirit. And if because I have a lot of opportunities, I have people who talk to me all the time about, oh, here's a new brand, or here's a new business, or here's a new thing, and or you should invest in this crypto coin, or there's a lot of excitement in the business world, and I feel that. I feel that from people, that there's excitement and it's very attractive, and so, but ultimately, I have to pause, and I think what I've learned to do is to find God's peace. And just because something excites you doesn't necessarily mean that God's peace is on it. And so I have to be very careful in the sense that I also know that the decisions I make affect a lot of other people, especially now that I'm a father of two kids, for my wife and for my two kids, and also for our extended family and for friends and community, that the decisions I make have a very significant impact on the people around me. And so I have to also be aware that I do believe that there are pathways and of less resistance, let's say, when we obey the Lord, and I find that His leading, the way that He speaks to me, is in peace, is in finding a peace where when an opportunity comes along, I may feel excited, but I don't feel a peace about it. I don't feel a sense of like, yes, like I just feel a real peace about pursuing this. And so I've made that mistake many times, over the years as an entrepreneur, because there's a lot of opportunities that kind of just get thrown your way that you don't expect. And some people have the idea of like, let's just try everything. There's a lot of people. I know some people out there that are like that. And if that's your thing, then maybe you're up for that. But it doesn't work for me. And so I would just say, as a piece of advice for entrepreneurs, is you have to find God's peace in what you're doing, not just the excitement, not just the energy. There's got to be something deeper than that. And I don't know how to describe what that feels like, because I think it's maybe different for different people. But for me, I know when I feel it. I know when I feel an opportunity comes along and I just go, yes. Like I feel in my spirit, like this is going to be a positive thing. I have great confidence in my spirit that this is going to be honoring to the Lord and that I can do it. It's within my bandwidth to do it. It's not going to have a massive negative impact on say I have to travel a lot more where I don't get to see my family as much or something like that. So it's gotta fit within that framework for me where I feel a sense of peace about it. And that means that I say no to a lot of things. And that's also, you hear people say that, but the things you say no to are more important than the things you say yes to in business as an entrepreneur. And so that's definitely a piece of advice that I would say has resonated, with me, is cut out the things that you don't feel a peace about and focus on the things you do feel a peace about. Because even if it's not entirely successful, like I was just sharing in my story, it can still lead to something. and God has a way of, teeing you up for things. And so if you are obedient and you listen and you find the peace, that comes from the Holy Spirit that you feel in your heart, and you follow that, then good things will happen, and God's going to take care of you. And so that's it doesn't always make perfect business sense, but that's kind of been my mentality. I don't mind failing in a business sense. I don't mind if a business fails, but I can't fail at life. I can't fail on my wife. I can't fail on my family. I can't fail on my community. So that to me is kind of what I look for whenever it comes to new opportunities and things. Yes, there's a natural fear that can come, obviously, with taking risks and things. So there's that. But everything that I've done, obviously I made a few mistakes along the way, but the big things that I've done, the decisions I've made, I had a sense of peace. And if you're married, your wife is also a very good direction for that. And God has spoken to me, even though my wife is the furthest thing from a business mind. She has no real interest in business at all and has no business experience, let's say. I listen to her because God has put her in my life, and she is a big voice for me. So I think as an entrepreneur, you just have to listen to the voices around you, whether that's your family, your friends, your community, your spouse, and find that peace. Find the peace of the Holy Spirit. Search for that, like actually actively search for it and see if it's there. And if you can't find it, then it probably means the opportunity is not the right thing.
Mm. So I should say at this point that Anthony's wife's name is Joyce. He has a 10-year-old daughter named Alina and a recent son who's a year and a half old. His name is James. He was born in the car on the way to the hospital, which is another story in itself, and has some chaotic moments and also some humorous moments, but we're not going to go into that story on this podcast. But when Anthony was young, this is after we moved back to the United States, when I would put him to bed at night, as he recalls, I would say the blessing that Moses spoke over the Jewish people out of Numbers, which basically I would just lay my hand on him and I would just speak this blessing: the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And just to close this off, as your father, even though you are a grown man now, I'm just going to speak blessing over you
All right.
and your family. So, Lord, thank you for Anthony and Joyce and Alina and James. I just speak blessing over your lives. I pray that you would prosper spiritually. I pray that God would bring the right believers into your lives to fellowship with. I pray that your children would come to know Christ at an early age. I know Alina already does, but I pray for James as well, that he would come to know the presence and the activity of the Holy Spirit, even at a year and a half of age. I pray that both of them would find their place in the kingdom, that both of them would find their place in terms of occupation and spouses. I just pray that Joyce would prosper in every way as a mother and as a wife. And I just pray that you would show them their future when they need to know it. I know they may not live in Bangkok forever. They've talked about moving other places, but I pray that at the right time you would show them where they need to be and what they need to be doing. And I just pray God's blessing on your entire life, everything about it. And I just pray a double portion on you. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
And I just want to finish by saying thank you for taking the time to do this podcast with me and letting me interview you and just telling your story. Thank you very much.
It's been a lot of fun.
Do not cast me away.
Thank you for listening. More next time. You will rise.
This heart